Okay, so welcome back everybody, here and online. And yes, it's a real pleasure to be here to talk about Akshobya, who feels like such a key presence in my life. And I would even go so far as to say like a real friend, a sort of spiritual friend and mentor and companion over the years. And quite mysterious, because I kind of feel that he came to me before I even knew he existed. When I first started coming along to things, I knew very little about the Dharma, nothing really about any of the archetypal figures. I was very resistant and cynical, especially around all the devotional practice and pujas and things like that. But I do remember going on a retreat at Taraloka, and Ratnashuri, who's one of the founders of Taraloka, which is the women's retreat centre, she had a very strong connection with Amitabha, another of the Mandala of the Five Buddhas, and there was a shrine dedicated to Amitabha, and she introduced it, and that was when I first came to love Amitabha. But as far as I knew, Amitabha was just one-off. I didn't know he was part of this mandala. And at that time, I was doing a counselling training, and we'd go on these residentials, and one of them we got led in a guided visualization. And during that visualization, I had this really strong image of this dark blue Buddha. You know, I didn't know there was a dark blue Buddha, but it was in my mind, in my psyche. And when I came back, I talked about it with some people. I said, "Oh no, that's Akshobya. Yeah, you should read about him in Meeting the Buddhas." So I got hold of a copy of Meeting the Buddhas and tried to read about it, and it made no sense to me at all. To be quite honest, it just like a bit what. However, there were certain things a bit that I kind of did take in, and that did speak to me, because at that point in my life, I was dealing a lot with hatred, self-hatred, a lot of anger, resentment towards someone who'd harmed me a lot in the past, but also I had very low self-esteem and things like that, and was endlessly self-sabotaging. So the fact that he helped work with ill will and hatred struck me, and very much I was drawn by this idea of the mirror-like wisdom, which I'm going to talk to you a bit more about. But I suppose what I was just trying to say is it felt like he came to me, you know, he knew that there was something significant that could, you know, in that connection between us, that I needed him in a way. And that they are quite mysterious, these figures. I spent a lot of time trying to work out who they were, what they were they real, were they not real, were they just in my imagination, were they inside or outside? And I don't think any of that matters, really. I think we just need to be open to them and their energies and the symbols and let them work on us. And if something draws you to it, then go with it. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of different symbols, correlations associated with Akshobya today, and it may feel a little bit like overwhelming. Just don't worry about it, you know. If there's just one thing that you come away with, like the colour dark blue, that's enough, you know. Let that have an effect on you. Or if any of the other things I say. I think with my experience of practice is that whatever it is that I take away from a retreat or a talk or a meditation, that is what I need at that moment in my practice, and I just trust that and let that unfold. So I would say, yeah, feel free to forget and ignore half of what I say, but if there's one thing that touches you, then go with it. So I think you've already had some talking about mandalas and about this particular mandala of these 5 archetypal Buddhas, sometimes called the 5 Jinnas or the 5 conquerors. And Akshobya is the dark blue Buddha of the East. And traditionally, you enter the mandala in the East. So all the Buddhas have the same correlations, but different things in those positions. So like Akshobya may be the Buddha of the East, Amitabha the Buddha of the West, Ratnasamba of the south, Amoghasiddhi of the north, and then at the centre you have Varochana. And each is associated with a particular colour, with a particular direction, particular element, time of day. They all sit on a throne that's supported by different animals, or in the case of Amoghasiddhi, more like a mythical half bird, half human figures called Garudas. They're all associated with a realm from the wheel of life. They all help to transform a particular poison or root poison through their unique wisdom, and they all have a particular wisdom. They're also, each of them, a head of a particular family of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So Akshobya is head of the Vajra family. So here's a Vajra, which I will be talking more about in the future, which is a symbol for reality and wisdom and insight, amongst other things. So Akshobya is the head of the wisdom family of all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Interestingly, he was also head of all the wrathful figures. So when you see those images of quite fierce-looking creatures or Darkinis, and they're stomping on people's skulls and they're wielding weapons and stuff, they all also belong to the family of Akshobya. So, dark blue, Buddha of the East, and his name means unshakable. Okay, so, and there's that unshakable quality about him. You know, it's quite imperturbable. He's got a sense of continuity of practice and confidence. Yeah, that touching the earth, calling the earth to witness, you know, is one of the things about having confidence in your own practice, confidence in the Dharma and everything else, which I think probably a lot of us need to work on. You know, it's very easy to undermine ourselves or not believe in ourselves. Maybe not even believe in the Dharma and the practices, but even if you do, you can maybe not believe that you are capable of change and transformation, not believe that you have all these qualities within you. That's one of the things that's so, I think, encouraging about Buddhism, is that although it's very pragmatic and saying that until we're enlightened, we're all driven by greed, hatred, delusion, it also says that we all have Buddha nature within us. We have all these qualities within us, and if we create the right conditions and if we practice over time, then we too can become like the Buddha. We can have that awakening experience. So awakening, Bodhi, is very much about wisdom and awakening. And from a Buddhist point of view, you sometimes hear insight, wisdom described as seeing things as they really are. And that's with a dharmic perspective. So you're seeing things knowing that they're impermanent. You're seeing things knowing that things are unsatisfactory. There is dukkha in the world, that things aren't fixed. Yeah. But it's also a way of being with what actually is. So seeing, I mean, that is sort of privileging seeing, but it could equally be feeling or hearing or just experiencing things as they are. Yeah. I know that for me, I used to think, oh, I'm not even going to bother thinking about enlightenment because it's so far away and I'm never going to get enlightened, there's no point thinking about it. But actually, over time, you know, developing awareness, developing insight becomes much more important to me. You know, that sense of unfolding, awakening, developing my potential, becoming more and more like the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas if I can, feels like a really, really inspiring goal to be trying for. And yet it's also not like I'm here and I have to get there. There's all kinds of paradoxes in that Akshobya helps us to explore. But I think one of the things that I I suppose I'm feeling more and more is that insight, awakening is possible at any moment and in our everyday experience just as much as through, years and years of practice and study and all of those kinds of things. Yeah. We can't study our way to awakening and enlightenment. We can't think our way to awakening and alignment. Yeah. We need to bring all of ourselves into that, and that includes our whole being and our whole mind, and the mind is so much more than our cognitive, rational, thinking mind. Yes. There's all the unconscious depths that we're not aware of, when we're thinking, but often have a lot more influence on us. And there's ways that we can be wise, that we can know things that aren't about cleverness or thinking. The body has its own wisdom, the heart has its wisdom, as well as, our intellectual understanding, which is not to knock that, because actually it does help to understand things and have knowledge. But from that place, I think we have to do a little bit of letting go and not just keep on that level, to allow the rest of ourselves to get involved. Sangharakshita talked about the language of the depths, and very much about how, the rational mind, you can't just do it through the rational mind, you have to engage all of you, including those depths. And but actually, in order to engage all of that, you need to speak a different kind of language, like the language of archetype and symbol, things that don't necessarily make sense, you can't quite put into words, you can't quite conceptualize. I'm sure you've all had experiences in your lives, experience in meditation, which you can't put into words, that are beyond that. So how much more that sort of fully awakening experience is beyond putting into those words as well. So yes, Akshobya, unshakable. Now I always thought unshakable just meant that, it was really solid and really grounded, and you couldn't shake him. And that kind of fit in very well with that image of the elephant, because they're sort of pretty solid, aren't they? An elephant, it'd be hard to push over an elephant. But actually, it comes from a story about, his origin story. I like comics, I like superheroes, they always have their origin story. Well, part of Akshobya's origin story is that when he was a monk, he took his bodhisattva vows about wanting to, gain enlightenment for the sake of all living beings. So any Buddha, any bodhisattva takes these vows for, to do that for the sake of all beings, but they also have their own individual takes on the vows. And one of the things that he's particularly noted for is that he vowed that he wasn't going to bear malice towards any living being, and also that he wasn't going to act out of hatred. Yeah. So, and we're told that through eons and eons and eons of practice, he was unshakable in that resolve, and he never did. And that's why he's unshakable. So it's something about that continuity of practice and, following through on your intentions that also make him unshakable. And I think it's interesting because he's particularly associated with transforming the root poison of ill will and hatred, that he made that vow. And I think for a lot of us, we hear those words, ill will, hatred, and it kind of makes us anxious, or we don't want to go there, or we don't want to acknowledge that within ourselves, or we get a bit scared about it. Or maybe we get into denial about it. I know that there were times when, although I did have experiences of feeling murderous rage, I would also deny that I felt angry at all. The metta bhavana, I can't think of anyone to put in the fourth stage, And I think also we tend to go to extremes and think, well, it has to be my mortal enemy. But actually, there's a whole continuum in that idea of ill will and hatred, and some of it could manifest in ways that we don't even feel a strong emotion with. may just be someone we're not interested in, or a bit bored by, or we just don't particularly feel are our kind of person, we want to spend time with them, yeah? It could be that we're a bit critical, or that we make fun of them when we don't think, oh, that's hatred, but actually there is some ill will probably present, yeah? And also, there's often, for a lot of us, we might have some ill will towards ourselves. You know, we might not think we're good enough. We might blame ourselves. There might be certain parts of ourselves that we don't like. You know, we might even have some self-hatred. But anyway, that's all just part of human experience, but those are all things that aren't necessarily true, you know. But it makes it very hard to live our lives, doesn't it? It makes it very hard to practice when we've got that story, that belief about ourselves. So that's where using Akshobya's mirror-like wisdom to help transform that, you know, can be really helpful. So the mirror-like wisdom, I found it very helpful in that case, because rather than reacting or judging, or I shouldn't be feeling this or this, I would just try and bring that mirror-like wisdom to see, well, what is, yes, actually, at this moment, I am feeling, you know, resentment towards someone, I am feeling ill will towards someone, or at this moment, you know, I am thinking things that I'm not proud of, you know, I have acted in ways that I'm not proud of. But just to actually see it first enables you to begin to explore it. And we can't really integrate or transform parts of ourselves without actually allowing ourselves to recognize them, to own them, you know. And it's very hard to own them when we feel bad about them and we're judging ourselves and we feel shame and guilt and things about them. So in a way, that mirror-like wisdom can be a way of cutting through that, to just, well, this is what is. You know, it may not be what I want to be there, but this is what's there. And if you can do that with an attitude that's a bit more open, a bit more accepting, you know, allowing yourself to be how you are. And again, that thing that I was mentioning in the meditation, bringing a bit more kindness there, a bit more metta there, that makes it much more possible to acknowledge that. And then over time, that makes it much more possible to transform and change. But if we don't allow ourselves to, then it just goes underground, gets expressed in all kinds of ways that can be quite destructive and will definitely get in our way. I mean, one of the things I think is quite interesting about Akshobya is the fact that he's also the head of all the wrathful figures, because there's also that sense that anger itself, there's nothing wrong with anger. Maybe even rage. It's if you're directing it against a living being to cause harm, whether that being is yourself or someone else, that's when it becomes unskillful. That's when it veers into that ill will and hatred side. But actually, that wrathful energy can be really helpful in our practice to help clear away obstacles that are getting in our way, whether those are internal or external. So it's good to actually realize that we can use that. Energy is just energy, you know. It's how we use that, how we direct it. You know, it can be changed, it can be transformed, can't be destroyed. That's one of the things about energy, isn't it? But rather than think, oh, I shouldn't be feeling anger, how can you use it in a constructive way to help you in your practice? Yeah? I mean, it is very uncomfortable being in a place of hatred, I think, or self-hatred, and not a pleasant state to be in. And I think that also links into the fact that Akshobya is associated with the hell realm, because that is kind of that hell realm, being in those states of mind, not seeing a way out. But it's also interesting that the hell realm, of all the realms in the wheel of life, has the most Buddha seeds, you know. So even if we may have experienced hellish conditions in our lives, those can actually be turned around, become the potential for awakening, for us to grow and develop. And I know, you know, in the past I used to think, oh, I had all these experiences and, you know, feel very sorry for myself or angry and bitter about certain things. or think, oh, I had all these bad conditions. But actually, in a wider perspective, I think they were actually very positive conditions for me over time, because then I was able to grow and develop and change. And who I am now, I wouldn't be without having had to deal with those conditions. But that's why metta is so important as well. And Akshobya is very much associated with metta, and it said that he transforms that poison of ill will and hatred into metta. Another thing that's quite interesting about that is that from a Buddhist perspective, it's seen that hatred is very close to wisdom. Because when you hate something, often you see it very clearly. All the things that you hate, all the little details, yeah? So if you can see that with that clarity, but without the hatred and ill will, then that's when we get into, insight, enlightenment, awakening, yeah? Okay, I think I ought to talk a little bit about the Vajra. So it's the Vajra family, the wisdom family, that Akshobya is the head of. So this is a Vajra. A lot of you seen a Vajra before, and they're quite mysterious figures, and it might not speak to you because it's coming from a different kind of culture, but over the time it's become very meaningful to me, even though at first I thought, well, what on earth is that? So I'm just going to say a few things about the actual structure of it. So in the center, you've kind of got like an egg, and that's sort of before there's any duality, you've got the egg and things emerging out of that. And this is my personal view, so I don't think everything I'm saying is true or fixed, yeah? But then out of that, on either side of it, you've got lotus petals emerging, lotus flowers. So the lotus is another symbol, metaphor for the spiritual path, very much about unfolding, awakening. And in fact, Amitabha is the head of the lotus family, the compassion family. And very much that sense that they grow in the mud and the dirt and come up through all of that. Anyway, so there's very much that sense of unfolding, growing. And then out of the lotus petals, you can't really see it very clearly, but you've got the head of a creature called a makara, which is half amphibious and half land, and it's a bit more mythical, but that whole idea of inhabiting two particular mediums, not just one. And in a way you could think about the heights, maybe of the mind and the depths of the emotions in the water. They're a bit like a crocodile, I think. And then out of the heads of the makara, you have these spokes coming. So if I do it like that, you can see that you've basically got 4 spokes that curve together. And then in the middle, going through the center of the Vajra, you've got a 5th spoke. So at either end, you've got 5 spokes. Yeah. So, like all symbols, you can put lots and lots of ideas and associations onto them. But one of the things about this is that it's a symbol of reality, and that you could see one side as representing samsara, one side representing nirvana. And they're completely connected. You've got that central thing together. So we often think of here's nirvana, here's samsara. I need to, move from samsara to nirvana, and but actually they're both present all the time. They're both intimately interconnected. There's not necessarily that separation. That's just how we perceive them, how we experience them. Yeah. And one of the things about insight and going beyond all these kinds of dualities and polarizations that we have would involve, going beyond that sense of them being separate. You could also see one as representing the sort of 5 poisons. So as well as hatred and will, you've got delusion, you've got greed, you've got pride, and you've also got on the other side, I suppose, more spiritual qualities. And it can also represent the 5 Buddha mandala as manifestations of enlightened beings and the qualities of enlightenment. And again, everything is connected, and I see it as not being necessarily static, but there's a sort of flow of energy in them. And with all the poisons, those can get transformed, into a spiritual quality, into enlightenment, factor, or whatever. It's a diamond thunderbolt, we're told, and it's indestructible, nothing can harm it, and it can cut through anything. Yeah. And you will often see, especially some of those wrathful figures, they'll wield it like a weapon. They'll be going towards demons or whatever else it is. And it's a representation of insight and wisdom in that way, that we can have that sort of thunderbolt, that light of insight that suddenly cuts through everything. And once that's happened, you can't go back to thinking about things the way you did, because you've had that insight. Yeah. And we might have a lot of those, lots of those, or we might have one really massive one, But that is one aspect of the wisdom, seeing through, cutting through delusions, cutting through views and our conditioning and all the things that hold us back. Yeah. But it's interesting that if you see, this Akshobya's got a little Vajra in his left hand, because what he normally has is his right hand is touching the earth, and his left hand is in front of him with a Vajra perfectly balanced upright. Yeah. So there's all the energy, all the power of the Vajra, but he's not needing to do it as a weapon. It's just there. It's a sense of he's in touch with reality, but also that energy can be very still, very contained. Doesn't have to be forceful. And the other aspect of his wisdom that correlates with his time of day is he's associated with dawn. Yeah. So I don't know how many of you have been up at dawn. It's dark, yes, and you can't see anything, and then kind of mysteriously over a little period of time it's day and it's light, and you can't actually say at this moment it's like this, but it just gradually happens. Yeah. So as well as those bolts of insight, you can have that insight, that awakening, that awareness developing slowly over time, imperceptibly over time. You can't necessarily put your finger on when you particularly had that understanding, because it's happening as a result of your life, your experiences. Yeah. So with Akshobya, you've got both that slowly dawning awareness and wisdom, but also the cutting through and seeing things in a different kind of a way, which I think can also, inform our practice, in that there's all the everyday little things that we do moment by moment that can be helping us to develop that awakening, that insight, and there might be, sometimes we go on a retreat, or sometimes we have a particular response to a situation, or hear something that just makes us see things in a different way, which would be more like that cutting through, that diamond thunderbolt. Yeah. So, going back to the elephants, I love elephants. And I think they also encapsulate, like, going beyond the holding the two dualities. Because on the one hand, like an elephant, when it's on the rampage, when it's angry, is very destructive. They can knock over jeeps, they can completely demolish a village, they can kill, trample over things. You wouldn't really want to encounter a rampaging elephant or be in the way of it, unless you're the Buddha, in which case there is that story of how his cousin Devadatta tried to kill him with a rampaging elephant, but of course the Buddha was able to calm the elephant. But for most of us, we wouldn't really want to experience that, because it would probably kill us. But there's also that other quality about elephants, that they're very gentle. They're very kind, they're very compassionate. They have a real sense of community. and caring for other elephants in their community, and also actually caring for other elephants that aren't in their community when they encounter them, and other creatures. I mean, I remember seeing quite a few elephant videos at times, and one of them was like there was this little, I think it was a hippopotamus, baby hippopotamus that had fallen into a river and was stuck and was drowning, and these elephants came to save it, you know. They have that ancestral, you know, especially the matriarchs, they have that ancestral knowledge, and they travel these vast distances and they remember the burial grounds, and, you know, there is that sense that we have on there of elephants having a good memory and things like that. So there's also that kind of wisdom aspect to them as well. Yeah, there's a sort of sense of gentleness there, and also playfulness, you know. If you've seen elephants, particularly when they're in the water, and they've got their trunks and they're squirting water all over the place and over each other, and there's a real sense of playfulness and joy. Yeah, there's an image that you come across, I don't know where it is in the early texts, about comparing the work of a bodhisattva, which is basically saving, you know, all sentient beings and relieving the sufferings of all sentient beings in the world, which you would think, oh, that's a bit of a downer, that's a bit of a heavy thing. But for them, it's their play, workers' play, lila. And there's a sense that they're like a great elephant on a hot summer's day, you know, that encounters a big pond and they're plunging from one pool to another pool and enjoying themselves. Which I think is a nice reminder that the path doesn't have to be all serious or gloomy. We don't always have to be focusing on dukkha and impermanence and things like that. Or if it, you know, impermanence can also open us up to sort of pleasure and joy. And his, all the Buddhas create a Buddha land where people can be reborn, and that will help them in their practice, and they will then become awakened at some point. And for Akshobya, his land is called Abhirati, and that's very much a land of joy and intense pleasure and delight. So when we're thinking about reality, we tend to have our own view about what reality is. You know, when I was younger, I thought the world was a terrible place and people were, you know, you couldn't trust anybody and all sorts of stuff. So my view on reality was very jaded, very, well, I suppose very depressing, actually. And I thought anybody who was sort of like happy and positive, that they were just either in denial or deluded, you know. And then there's other people who might just want to focus on all the happy stuff and deny all the difficult stuff that's going on. But actually reality is both, yeah. And it just is, you know, there's things happening in the world that I really don't like, that distress me a lot. But that is actually what is happening, and that is part of reality. You know, from a Buddhist point of view, they talk about the three lakshanas, or the marks, or things about reality, one of which is dukkha, which is that, you know, there is suffering. Things are unsatisfactory. I heard somebody talk about it in terms of disappointment. We don't always get what we want. We get things we don't want. And even when we have things that we want, we know that they're not going to stay because things are impermanent. So we might, even though everything might be wonderful at that moment, part of us is worrying about when we're going to be losing it. So there is dukkha. But if we can accept that dukkha is there, then we can actually stop a whole layer of our dukkha and suffering, which is how we react against it and how we try to, you know, avoid it or pretend it's not there, or rather than, yeah, there is dukkha. You know, what can I do in this situation? What is the best thing that I can do? So, you know, I suppose for me, this last year's been quite challenging in lots of ways in terms of all the things that were happening with my health, which I didn't want. You know, it wasn't very nice to suddenly find I had a diagnosis of cancer, and at the time when it was diagnosed and they told me it was this fairly rare form, and I looked it up on the internet and they said, oh, by the time you're, diagnosed, you've probably only got 3 or 4 months to live. And but I couldn't do anything about it. That was my diagnosis, and all the things that are along the way, the operation lasted 5.5 hours, and there was a lot of pain and discomfort afterwards. Having chemo, there's a lot of very unpleasant things, but in a way, that was just my reality. I could have made myself much more unhappy by thinking, why me, and all this, and but actually I just had to deal, and I think having practiced a lot, having that dharmic perspective was so helpful. Having Sangha really was so supportive. But also, I was very aware of sort of Akshobya and his qualities. I'd made a little shrine in the hospital, and my friend, some of you will know because she's associated a bit with North London, Maitri Pushpa. She came to visit me one time when I was in a state, and also I've been finding all the hospital systems and they hadn't been listening to me and all that kind of stuff, and she just picked up this Vajra which was there, put it in my hand and said, you need to start channeling Akshobya, which was just really helpful, that sense of being grounded, that sense of being with what is, also that sense of just bringing kindness to things. And also that sense of metta, and responding to the metta and the kindness that I was experiencing. And there was so much that I was, whether it was from the nurses and the people in the hospital, whether it was from friends and family or people further out in the Sangha. I was very aware of that and how important it was. So wisdom and compassion are not separate, Although Akshobya is the head of the wisdom family, that doesn't mean to say he doesn't have compassion, which, obviously the metta is very strong with him. And again, it's going beyond those polarizations, those dualities. It's not wisdom here, compassion there, in order to experience or practice compassion, you need wisdom, and true wisdom is informed by compassion, and they're seen as two wings of the same bird. Obviously a bird can't fly with just one wing, so in terms of our path, in terms of that awakening enlightenment journey, you need those two wings, and you also need the energy, so that wrathful energy, that Vajric energy, but also that still energy are also important components in practice. And you will sometimes hear enlightenment also talked in terms of compassion, wisdom and energy, as well as in terms of compassion and wisdom. So yeah, his element's water, and water has so many different associations with it, and it is often, connected with wisdom and depths and mysteries, but it comes in all sorts of different forms as well, doesn't it? You can get like little dewdrops, you can get rain, you can get hurricanes and thunderstorms, you can get lakes, the sea. But when it's still, when you've got a lake and it's still, you get that mirror-like wisdom, yeah. And there's something about Akshobya and his unshakableness that for me also connects with equanimity, yeah, and being able to hold, contain whatever is happening in our experience, becoming big enough to do that, and like a big still body of water. And they say that if you drink a glass of water, you put some salt in it, then it might be hard to drink. But if you get a glass of water from a lake where you've put a spoonful of salt, then you won't taste it at all. So if we can become bigger and bigger, whatever it is we can experience, we can hold, we can be with. So I've noticed that I've gone on a long time. So I think I'm going to bring that to a close in terms of just introducing you to some of the symbols and correlations associated with Akshobya. And there's just a little while if anybody's got any questions. Just feel free to jump in. Hi.
Hi. How do you kind of bring Akshobya into your practice?
Into
your practice, like in your meditation or
Well, some of it is sort of like very mundane. Is like over the years, people who know me will notice that I spend a lot of time wearing dark blue, so that's a way of connecting with him. And I also have a massive collection of elephants. I suppose sometimes it's conscious. Sometimes I'll be thinking about his qualities. Sometimes it will not be conscious, but also like because it's interesting because when you get ordained and you often choose a particular figure as what they call your yidam, and then you're given a visualization practice, and certainly with a lot of the Tibetans, they will visualize particular figures, and that'll be their main practice, and that will have a big impact on you. And there are people within the order who do that very regularly every single day, which I never have done, actually. And it's interesting because I felt that I already had a strong connection with Akshobya, and that visualization to me didn't quite necessarily bring it to me. Sometimes it would, but sometimes just maybe just thinking about the earth touching mudra, even doing the earth touching mudra, mudra basically being what they do with their hands. All these Buddhas have a different mudra. So Amitabha's one is meditation, the dhyana mudra, and you've got Akshobya with the fearlessness one, Manasambha with his generosity one, and for Akshobya it's the earth touching mudra. So actually physically doing it can sometimes have an impact. And I think sometimes it's just you're in a particular situation and you realise that bringing in that perspective can be helpful. But I think for me, very much that mirror-like wisdom, just trying to be with what is, trying not to judge, has been a really strong practice for me. And also more self-metta has been really powerful for me. I don't know if that helps. Yeah. Okay.
As a musician and an artist, do you find another kind of channel being the mentor?
Yes. Actually, that's very obvious about how I practice is devotional practice. Yeah. Because, there's the imagination, just allowing these symbols to be there in your imagination have a powerful effect. Whether you're consciously thinking I'm doing a spiritual practice or it's just like, you're being influenced by that whole image of water or the colour or whatever else it is. But in terms of mantras, yes, all of the Buddhas have a mantra, and a mantra is seen as being like a symbol of enlightenment and capturing that particular Buddha. Just as you've got the image, which is a sort of visual representation, the mantra is a sound representation, and I do find mantra is a very strong practice for me, and I will quite often, in the past I have often done like a whole period of like chanting a mantra for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, and it takes you out of that cognitive place as well. It takes you into a more deep place and a sense of connecting with the figure. So devotional practice like pujas, rituals, but not necessarily pujas and rituals. It can be anything that's, and there is a whole practice around imagining the Buddha, contemplating the Buddha, and you can contemplate Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha, or if there's a particular figure that, you want to. So I might do that. I might not even have my eyes closed, but by looking at a shrine or an image of Akshobya, that might be having an effect on me. Yeah.
Which of the Buddhas in the mandalas connected with medicine and healing?
Well, there is actually a medicine Buddha who, interestingly enough, is dark blue. Um, the one that's particularly associated with the healing is actually Matnesambhava, the yellow Buddha of the south and of the human realm. But I would say they all are. And one thing to remember is that all these Buddhas, these archetypal Buddhas, they're basically the Buddha. There's only one Buddha, you know. So they are representations of the Buddha. And they're just kind of emphasizing different qualities of them, or maybe a different approach to practice. But they all have all the qualities. You know, they all are kind, compassionate, they all have equanimity, they all have wisdom, they all have, you know. But it may be that a particular set of correlations, image or whatever, appeals to you more. You know, maybe the idea of generosity and giving appeals to you, and Ratnasamba really touches you. He's also very much around creativity and healing. Maybe Amitabha and his compassion, you know, and his love for all beings, you know, maybe that really touches you. Maybe more of the action and the fearlessness of Omega Siddhi appeals to you. But they all have those qualities there. It's just that particular ones are emphasized when you look at them. And if you go into any one deeply, you'll reach the same place, really.